Good day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Digital Endpoint Development for Alzheimer's Disease, the Importance of Patients as Partners. My name is Sonia Hunt, and it's my pleasure to be your X Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout this presentation by using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank VivoSense, who developed the content for this presentation. VivoSense Inc. develops and validates real-world digital clinical measures and provides end-to-end services and solutions for their delivery in clinical trials. Their hypothesis-driven framework provides analytical and clinical validation, leading to FDA approval. VivoSense delivers novel digital biomarkers from wearable sensor data, which constitute primary and secondary clinical endpoints in regulated international pharmaceutical trials. VivoSense is dedicated to improving patient clinical research and care. And now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator for today's event, and she is Jen Blankenship. And there she is, Senior Research Scientist with VivoSense. Hi, Jen. Jen obtained a PhD in kinesiology at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She has extensive experience deploying wearable sensors and other digital health technologies in real-world study designs to understand the impact of novel treatments and therapeutics on aspects of daily life. At VivoSense, Jen is working to develop novel digital clinical measures derived from wearable sensors that capture aspects of life that matter to patients with Alzheimer's disease. And now I pass the mic over to Jen.
Thanks so much, Sonia, and thank you all for joining us today. I'd like to start by setting the context for what brings us here today, and that is that there's a real need to innovate how we do clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease. As many of you know, Alzheimer's disease is a leading cause of death with very few treatments available to cure or slow disease progression. This is coupled with the extraordinarily high failure rate in Alzheimer's disease drug development. And while there's been some exciting progress in recent years in this area, there's still a lot of work to be done and a lot of improvements that can be made. The cost associated with clinical trials in Alzheimer's disease is enormous, over $42.5 billion spent on trials since 1995. Given the high cost, how long it takes for these drugs to be developed and come to market, it's clear that there's a need for innovation. Next slide. One way, an area and opportunity for innovation advocated by FDA is patient-focused drug development. Now, patient-focused drug development is an approach that involves patients in all aspects of the drug development process, from the beginning of developing and designing a study through deciding what types of endpoints should be measured and how those drugs are assessed in post-market settings. Involving patients along this continuum is critical. VivoSense sees digital endpoints and remote patient monitoring as tools that can support the efforts in patient-focused drug development, as we can capture aspects of life in real-world settings. But the only way that this really truly can be patient-centered and advanced patient-focused drug development is by engaging those key stakeholders. And this is what brings us here today. How can we most effectively pull in the voice of patients, evaluate that, and integrate it into all that we do in endpoint development and drug development in Alzheimer's disease? Next slide. So today I'm excited to introduce to you our panel. We have a panel that incorporates the viewpoints from patients, technology providers, as well as the pharmaceutical industry. So at this time, I'd like to give you an overview of how the webinar will go. Each of our speakers will have a 10-minute speaking slot, and at the conclusion of all of the presentations, we'll have a 10 to 15-minute period of time for questions and answers. As Sonia highlighted, you can put your questions throughout the talks into that chat box, and we will do our best to address them at the end of the webinar. At this point, I'd like to ask all of our presenters to turn on their cameras and microphones and introduce themselves. So, Michael.
Hello, my name is Michael Ellenbogen, and I'm an international dementia advocate who is also living with the disease. Over to you, Shelby.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Shelby Bachman. I am a research scientist at VivoSense. Like Jen, I work on developing digital measures that reflect aspects of everyday behavior using wearable sensors. I'll pass it over to Francesca.
Thank you. Apologies for the delay. Hi, so I'm Francesca Cormack. I'm Chief Scientist at Cambridge Cognition. So my background is very much in neuroscience and computerized cognitive testing specifically. So this is active assessments that make use of digital technology to elicit and measure certain behaviors and tie that into neurodegenerative or psychiatric processes. So yeah, so with that, I'm going to hand over to Jelena.
Thanks, Francesca, and I'm very sorry that I cannot be on camera today, but I'm Jelena Ćurčić. I'm a data scientist working in Novartis in very early research, early drug development in neuroscience. Thank you.
Thank you, Jelena. And thank you all to our presenters for joining us today. Before we get started, we'd like to learn a little bit about who is in our audience. So Sonia, could you please launch the poll?
Certainly, I will do that right now, Jen. Audience members, you should see it take over your screen. And there it is. Okay, so it's a simple poll question that we have for you today. This is done in real time, so your participation is strongly encouraged and very much appreciated. And the question is, which category best describes you, the industry you represent? Is it technology provider, pharma, CRO, academic, or other? So please go ahead and cast your votes. And once we have closed the polls, I'll share the results and then we'll get right back into the discussion. Okay, that looks like it's the majority of our audience, Jen. I'm now going to close the polls and let's take a look at the results. Okay, so who do we have in our audience? Okay, so 26% of our audience members chose technology provider, while 30% chose pharma, 11% said CRO, while 15% said academic, and 19% said other. So thank you everyone for participating in our first poll question, or actually our only poll question. Jen?
Thank you so much. At this time, I'd like to open up invite Michael to the virtual stage to open up our webinar. Michael, if you could turn your video on, thank you, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much for having me here today. My name is Michael Ellenbogen, and I was once a high-level manager in the IT world for a Fortune 500 financial institution. I was very lucky because I was always a visionist and created many new solutions. As they say, I was on the bleeding edge of technology. I know what is possible because I understand electronics, programming, and the intelligence that a staff can bring as they are challenged. Sadly, in 2008, I was diagnosed with dementia, and I'm slowly losing many of my skills. I could never have imagined how this disease like this can slowly rob one of their brain function in so many ways. I never realized how the brain must go through so much complexity because we all take that for granted. One day, I may become like a 5-year-old again. For me, my issue started at 39. I have known people who are 29 and 30 who have some type of dementia. So when you're thinking about our target population, this is not just older people. At first, I was able to use many types of technology to hide what I had. I carried an electronic dayminder and stored lots of important information on it. I started recording some of my voicemails and telephone conversations. All that helped at first, but the disease progressed. I could no longer keep my job. I do believe with the right technology, I may have been able to work another 2 to 4 years, but there would have to be some real out-of-box thinking to accomplish that. While I know I will not win this battle because there are no cures yet, and sadly, no drugs proven yet to slow this disease down, so I cannot only hope to be able to fight this for as long as I can and hope to continue to live my existing home. I have been lucky as I have had the opportunity to take part in about 15 clinical trials. In my opinion, so much of what they do needs to change, so they focus more on what's important to the person rather than just statistical numbers. For example, they need to focus on what's important to me now and how I can continue to be me longer and still do the things I love. While it would be great to improve to where I was once, I think that would be asking too much, knowing what I know about this disease. So I would be content on where I am today, just don't want to get worse. So I feel that clinical trials should not only look for improvement, but also to look to maintain as a measure of success. For me, that would be a win-win. But that is me, and I'm one of the lucky ones. I think others will have different based on what parts of their brain have been impacted. As we know, we all love music, which I do believe helps me many times to relax and stay calm, but not always. That same music can be very stressful at times and even push me over the edge. I'm not always sure what I need to do to make the experience better. Wouldn't it be great if I could wear a wearable that talked to my MP3 player? If it sensed it was too loud or too low, or even the wrong type of music for that moment, to make automatic adjustments. That alone, if measured, could tell pharma if things are improving or not. Using that type of data would be priceless. Just imagine how many things could be measured from such a simple task. And most importantly, this would be true data, unlike asking me questions that I'm clueless about, yet they use these key data points. Speaking of data points, my wife's pet peeve is that they ask the question, was Michael able to dress himself at least once in the last 3 months? I might have dressed myself every day for the first 3 months, only once a week the next 3 months, and only twice the entire last 3 months. That data would look the same. I was maintaining, when in reality, I was going downhill fast. While there is lots of technology out there, most of it is not geared to people like me with cognitive disability. There is so much more that can make my life so much better and allow me to stay safe in my home for much longer than it would be possible otherwise if technology existed. Sadly, folks who create fail to include people like me in the design process and the beta testing. Technology can be used to help me from getting lost, staying in touch with others, track if I fall, ensure I don't flood or burn down the house. It can ensure I take my meds and track my mood. In fact, what better way for pharma to understand the true benefits of their drugs if they were able to do remote monitoring of those devices? I have so much problems when I'm in public to hear and understand what others say. It can easily be resolved if I had a tool like noise canceling headphones combining with the directional microphone to be able to focus directly on the person speaking. That alone would allow me to be able to enjoy my life in public areas. Such a simple concept, but they will never know because they refuse to speak to people like me. I remember wanting to advocate in Washington, D.C., but I couldn't figure out how to buy a pass needed for the train. They had no person at the station to talk to or help me. This is the type of thing that stops us from going out and socializing. Then I remember waiting for the train, and I asked someone if I was in the right place, and I was informed I was. Not always that lucky, as others may send you the wrong way. Then I was on the train, and with the announcements and visual displays, I had the hardest time figuring out where I had to get off. All of this could have been easily very simplified with the right technology. Now, I am not saying all this technology needs to be complicated. Just build what is missing piece. For example, water alarms are so cheap that you can buy 3 for under $10. But what they cannot do in today's world is talk to each other on some applications. They just give you a 95 dB loud siren. Well, what if you built a device that has either a normal close or contact that can be named an application, and all you had to do is add it on to the existing product with a simple crimp of 2 wires? That would be so easy, and that device could be used with so many existing products. Now take it one step further, where that same device can trigger another device, which, let's say, now hooked up to the water shutoff valve in the basement. All of you now owe me royalties for this great idea. This is one simple concept that can change the world. You may be wondering what made me think of water alarms. I once flooded the laundry room when I forgot that I was filling up the bucket in the utility sink. Now I have water alarms everywhere in my house, including my bathtub. Many people in the field also think you can just bring a person with dementia who has no knowledge of technology and ask them what they need. How can someone answer that if they don't understand what is possible and what can be accomplished? We need to ensure we get the right people on board to ensure we can benefit all of those that need it the most. The key to building technology should include many factors. First, there should be a common protocol used for the output, so any device can talk to each other. Most people require more than one product, and for that reason alone, these devices should be able to speak to each other. So one can get simple feedback of all items connected on one platform. Second, it must be simple to use, simple to install, and simple to maintain. For a person like me, who was once a leader in technology, I can barely use my cell phone today. I have trouble to just answer the call. And I was one of the first to even have a cell phone when they were a huge box that one would carry in a large bag around your shoulder. I was once a gadget person, and the more buttons and complicated something was, I loved it. Today, that same technology scares the hell out of me. I never used to read instructions, and I was always able to make products work. Today, I read the instructions, and I cannot even understand the simplest steps. It's not that I cannot read, but I am unable to process what I read. Third, and most important, it must be affordable. You can have the technology in the world available, but if people can't afford it, it's useless. You need to remember that people with cognitive issues are most likely already in the lower salary bracket because many factors related to this condition. My wife and I were both forced to retire due to my disease. There is no doubt that technology is the answer until there is a cure. But it has to happen with companies starting to listen to us. I have reached out to many companies in the past dealing with technology, and all they did was blow me away. That is very frustrating, as I needed those tools to still continue to live my life to the full, even with dementia. Thank you so much for hearing me today, and I hope you all can, that is very frustrating, as those tools need to still continue to live life to the fullest, even with dementia. Thank you so much for hearing me today, and I hope you all can change that. And I should leave you with this. AI is the key to identifying dementia and to make our lives better, to start to think outside the box and think of the impossible as it can be done. Thank you, and over to Shelby.
Okay, thank you so much, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about our approach at VivoSense to develop digital measures from wearable sensors that can be used in Alzheimer's disease clinical research. And I'm going to focus on how we are taking a patient-focused approach in that process of measure development. So I'll start with a little bit of background on the domain that we're interested in measuring with wearable sensors. So as I'm sure this audience is very familiar, in the progression of Alzheimer's disease, there's a series of cognitive and physical changes that dramatically affect patients' ability to function on a day-to-day basis and perform, activities independently. And when we look to the literature regarding what patients and their caregivers find meaningful in the progression of Alzheimer's, this ability to function independently is very important to them. So what I'm showing on the right here this is a Venn diagram from a systematic review of studies that examined what's meaningful to patients with Alzheimer's, their caregivers, and healthcare professionals. And what we can see is that this ability to function independently and perform activities of daily living is something that across studies is noted as important by all three stakeholder groups. But despite what we know about functional independence being very important to patients and their caregivers, the majority of clinical trials in this space actually don't include an outcome that reflects the ability to function independently. So the statistic that I'm showing here is from a review of all clinical trials conducted between 2004 and 2014. It reported that only 32% of dementia trials actually included an outcome reflecting functioning. So when functional independence is assessed, it's typically done through informant-rated assessments of basic and instrumental activities of daily living. And these assessments capture some aspects of how patients are functioning, but they have a couple of important limitations. They're reliant on informants, so they're subjective in that sense. They're also burdensome for informants. These assessments also typically assess just a limited range of the physical challenges that patients actually experience in their real-world environments. And finally, especially at early disease stages, these assessments are prone to ceiling effects, which limits their ability to detect clinical change over time. So the question for us has really been, can we use digital measures derived from wearable sensors to improve functional assessment in Alzheimer's and really more holistically capture the aspects of functioning that matter to patients and to their caregivers? So just a little bit of background on wearable sensors. So these are devices such as accelerometers and GPS trackers that are worn on the body. These types of devices are able to capture physical behavior in a few ways that might offer real advantages for Alzheimer's disease research. On the one hand, they can be deployed remotely, allowing for the capture of those complex challenges that patients are actually navigating in their environments. There also data is captured passively. This is minimizing burden on patients and caregivers and also avoiding the need for another active task. And they also capture data continuously. So this offers the chance to increase sensitivity to detect clinically relevant change over time. These types of devices, they can capture many different aspects of physical behavior in the real world. So this includes things like aspects of gait, so gait speed, gait regularity as a few examples, the volume and variation of physical activity and sedentary behavior, the extent to which patients engage in habitual activities, and aspects of life space mobility, so the geographic area in which daily activities are performed. So there are a lot of things that we can capture with wearable sensors, but how do we decide where to start, what to measure? And the answer for us is really starting with input from patients. So what I'm showing here is the framework that we are taking to develop digital measures that can be deployed in Alzheimer's disease clinical research. So starting on the left, in the first stage, we really start by directly engaging with patients with Alzheimer's and their caregivers in order to understand what are the disease symptoms and impacts that matter to them, the things that they want to improve or to not get worse. And then what we do is we map those aspects onto concepts that can actually be measured with a wearable sensor. Once we've done the work of identifying what to measure, the next steps are to ensure that the measure of interest is feasible to capture in this population and that its capture is also accepted by patients. And then finally, there's a substantial amount of work to be done to show that the measure of interest is both clinically and analytically valid, so that it's related to clinical benefit over time and that it can be captured accurately and reliably. So we're taking this sort of patient-focused approach to developing digital measures, and we've received some funding to support this work. So our funding comes from a program called the Artificial Intelligence and Technology Collaboratories for Aging Research Program. This is a program funded by the NIA to promote the development and implementation of technology approaches that can really improve care and health outcomes for older adults with dementia and their caregivers. So we received a grant from the Massachusetts instance of this AITC program, and the work that I'm going to tell you about is work that we're doing in partnership with the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Cambridge Cognition, and the Center for Information and Study on Clinical Research Participation. So now I'll tell you about how we're really starting this measure development process and specifically engaging patients in this work. So again, as I mentioned, our first step for digital measure development begins with identifying those meaningful aspects of health for patients and mapping them to measurable concepts. So in the case of Alzheimer's, I already mentioned, we know from a lot of published literature that functional independence matters to patients and their caregivers. And so our goal in this work is to really understand, under that umbrella of functional independence, what are the specific measurable concepts, the things that we can capture with a wearable sensor. So how we're doing this is we're conducting a series of semi-structured interviews with patients in order to probe the specific aspects of functional independence and physical behavior that are important to them. So what I'm showing here, this is a quote from a previous study that examined meaningful aspects of health in Alzheimer's disease. And as you can see, this quote from a patient speaks to meaningful changes in functional independence. The patient is reporting that they used to go out all the time and do things. And so in our study, what we're doing is we're going to probe a little bit further in cases like this to try to understand the measurable concepts. So the patient is reporting a change in activities. What are the activities that they were previously more able to do? What are the symptoms that impact their ability to do those activities? And really distilling down to the frequency, duration, and intensity of those pieces, as well as what a meaningful change, what an effective treatment would look like for patients. So again, the goal here is to really go from what's meaningful to patients to concepts that we can actually measure with a sensor. So once we've done that, we've identified what to measure and selected a sensor that's capable of capturing it. There's of course a lot of evidence that needs to be generated before that measure is fit for purpose. And a key piece of that is understanding whether that measure is feasible and acceptable to capture in patients with Alzheimer's disease. So what we're doing is we're conducting a feasibility study to really understand whether these types of measures are practical to capture. So as part of this study, we're having patients with Alzheimer's disease wear a wearable sensor for 2 weeks in their real-world environments. And so one piece of it is directly looking at the data to understand the patterns of wear and non-wear. What was the overall volume of non-wear? Were there specific times of day when patients more often wear the sensors, more often not wear them. But another key piece of this is, so after patients have worn the sensors for 2 weeks, we're using a combination of semi-structured interviews and surveys to understand different aspects of their experience using the sensor. So we're asking them about things like comfort of the device, ease of use, challenges associated with use, whether the device interfered with any of their daily activities, any concerns that patients and their caregivers might have around data privacy and data sharing. We also ask questions about willingness to use the device for longer periods of time in different contexts. So at this stage, this combination of understanding actual feasibility from the data and patient input on their experience is really critical for us to understand how feasible and acceptable a digital measure is to capture. So this feasibility study is work that we're just launching now, and we're really excited to see how patient input at this stage can really shape the process of measure development. So that's all I have. I am going to now hand it over to Francesca.
Thank you very much. Sorry, I'm just having some technical issues with the PowerPoint. Sorry, it's just...
And Francesca, if you could maybe turn on your camera when you get a chance to.
Yes, I am still struggling.
Would you like me to drive the slides for you, Francesca?
Yeah, that would be great. PowerPoint seems to be sulking. I'll see if I can manage to turn my camera on at least. Sorry about this, just... Okay, maybe we can start without the camera and hopefully things will start working. So just to begin, I think the place where we're starting from is, from a very similar ethos to what VivoSense have articulated in terms of, measuring what matters and looking at meaningful aspects of health and then trying to clinically validate them. If we move over to the next slide, I think what we're also very excited by is moving kind of beyond the gold standard. So using digital technology, not just to kind of replicate assessments that have been done in clinic, but actually to provide much richer data, which can tell us something that goes beyond conventional assessments. So some of this is, as has just been explained, capturing aspects of behavior as people are going about their daily lives, but also from tasks such as picture description, which we have on the left-hand side here, being able to capture very rich aspects of behavior. So being able to really measure different aspects of speech and language and voice from this task. We're also, thanks to the availability of digital technology, able to capture patterns of behavior, which we can't really when we're only testing people, maybe every year or every 6 months, or if you're lucky and in a clinical trial, every 3 months, patterns of behavior that can only be observed on a daily basis. So this is, for instance, in the middle section is work that we've been doing looking at patterns of behavior across multiple days. So how people are able to learn sequentially over multiple exposures to the same stimuli. And this gives us aspects to, to measures of learning and memory, which are really much more sensitive than the ones that we conventionally use. And can give us insights into the underlying process of brain change with much greater sensitivity. And finally, when we're measuring using technology, so we're measuring on people's own devices, and we're measuring in ways that are quite light touch, so people can do them multiple times a day, is that we can start to understand the relationship between and across different modalities. So the relationship between the data that you might obtain from an active cognitive test with the data from activity sensors, for instance, so measures of activity and movement across multiple days. So in the panel on the right-hand side, this is data over 6 weeks of daily testing. So this really kind of opens up what we can measure and how we can measure, and I think gives us the potential to capture really exciting insights into behavior and change in behavior, either with treatment or with disease. If we move on to the next slide, I think one of the obstacles around this is not just issues of usability, like those that Michael so eloquently outlined, but actually our perceptions and researchers' perceptions about older adults and their use of technology and their willingness and ability to engage with technology. So quite often we hear that, you know, people will not like doing assessments on computers, that they would prefer to do assessments on pencil and paper. And we know across multiple studies that that isn't in fact the case. And I'm just going to talk you through a couple of data sets that really show the ability to capture data using digital technology from populations with MCI and early AD. So if you move on to the next slide, so this is data from the Deep and Frequent Phenotyping Study, which is a very ambitious project in the UK, looking at measuring people with prodromal Alzheimer's disease, so very early in the course of the disease, and mild cognitive impairment, often, and using a range of different modalities. So within this study, they're measuring clinical symptoms, cognition, they're measuring changes to the eyes with a whole ophthalmology thing, looking at changes in the retina. They're also measuring gait, and they're doing a whole raft of other assessments, similar to the ones that you'll see in a typical clinical trial. So things like lumbar punctures, like MRIs, like EEGs, like PET scans. What these data show, and this is data from the pilot study, which was really about evaluating the feasibility of doing this really high density data collection in patients with neurodegenerative disease. And you'll see the blue bars represent the percentage of complete data, complete kind of good quality data. And the yellow bars represent basically data where participants didn't want to do the task. And the labels are very, very small, but the top row is clinical data. So this is data that was collected, you know, through a clinical interview on site. The second one is cognitive assessments, and these were a battery of digital cognitive assessments that were administered 5 times over 6 months. And going down the way, we come all the way down to things like PET scans and all the rest of it. So this is just to put it into the context of everything else that patients who are taking part in clinical trials have to do. Actually, when we think about digital assessments, whether those are measures, passive measures or active measures, the patient burden and the patient willingness to take part in these is actually much greater than and much less than a lot of the other procedures, which are quite invasive and quite burdensome that they have to take part in. So I think it's important to consider the tools that we're developing in that broader context of everything else that patients in a clinical trial have to go through. If we move on to the next slide, this illustrates a little bit of data from something that tried to be in its own way more ambitious. So this was a study which was carried out looking at completing cognitive assessments, so active cognitive tasks, and these were often quite lengthy cognitive tasks, quite challenging. at home in an unsupervised way. There were patients who were cognitively normal, there were patients with mild cognitive impairment, and there were patients with Alzheimer's disease. The patients with cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease had a caregiver accompany them on this. But what we can see is that both the healthy controls and the patients with cognitive impairment had very good rates of completion on this. And they were taking part in 5 sessions up to 2 weeks apart with 4 tasks per session. This was quite a heavy testing burden. But again, this study revealed really good acceptability and really high quality data emerging from these technologies. So, you know, the message really, I think, is that it is possible to deploy digital technologies, not just in the clinic and get good results, as the previous study showed, but also deploy them at home and similarly get very good measures of compliance and very good quality data emerging from it. And the final slide I want to share is a study which has taken this to a slightly different direction. So this is a task which is the digit symbol substitution task. It's a very brief task, takes about 90 seconds, and this is designed to be administered on the smartphone. So this is not on a tablet computer that people might take home, but it can be done on their own devices. And what we are showing here is really, yes, we can get good correlation with the gold standard, in this case, a pencil and paper version of it. We can get good reliability of measurement. So the measurements that we're getting from this task are excellent. But on the right-hand side, the patient acceptability, I think, is something that's really, we're very pleased with. So these are data from a large study which is taking place in Europe at the moment. It's called the IdeaFast study, and it's looking at symptoms that matter to patients, in this case fatigue. And it's looking at measuring these using a range of different devices, so using a combination of wearable technology, of smartphones, and all sorts of sensors in the home and on the patient themselves. Again, these are data from the feasibility study, looking at the acceptability of these ways of capturing data from patients. And what these panels show is data from healthy participants, patients with inflammatory conditions, and patients with neurological disease. And what we're seeing in terms of the vertical line that's cutting through that graph is compliance, so completion of this, which was greater than 100%. Over a week's worth of testing. Sorry, have I been cut off? Yeah, good. Okay, I think my computer's a bit temperamental today. And what these the numbers show is that we had more than 100% coverage, 72% of cases. So 72% of patients were in fact providing more than 100% of the trials, of the data collection points that we were trying to elicit. And these are people being tested twice a day. So it's possible to collect data from digital devices in patients in clinic. It's possible to do it at home, even in patients with neurodegenerative disease. And it's possible to do this kind of data collection where we're assessing them every day on their own devices and in their own homes, and still get data back which is of high quality and provides us with excellent coverage. And I think really the message from me across these 3 studies is that really I think quite often we underestimate the patients that we're dealing with. We underestimate their desire to see effective treatments. We underestimate their desire to contribute to data collection, and we underestimate their ability to interact with technology. And I think all of these are barriers to the adoption and uptake of digital technology in clinical trials. And I think it's great to see that we can start to hear the patient's voice and get a better understanding of what they actually will do, and the data that they can contribute. And with that, I would like to pass on to Jelena.
Thank you, Francesca. I hope everybody can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you
Yes,
perfectly.
we can hear you.
Yes, great. Thank you. I will need a confirmation, a verbal one. Thanks. So my computer didn't want to connect at all, but the good old phone is working well. So thank you for having me. I would like to talk about shortly about patient and care partner burden or perceived burden, actually. I will be mostly talking about my experiences from Radar AD. This is a remote assessment of disease and relapse in Alzheimer's disease. I hope the slide is also up where you can see the website. And please, I'll urge everyone, it's a very exciting project, urge everyone to take a look. This is a consortium where we have engaged very early with Patient Advisory Board, Alzheimer Europe, to really make decisions together with patients and their care partners. Just shortly, we were studying remote measurement technologies to find better measures of function. We asked the patients to help us really define and prioritize functional domains most important to them. So first, to define what are these functional domains, right? To basically make sure we are measuring what is important to patients. In the next step, we asked the patients to vet basically devices we were mapping to those domains to make sure patients think they are useful, they would actually wear them in real life. We also did adjust a lot of instructional material, how apps look like, as we heard Michael also mention, and so on. We had asked them about our study design as well, and how to improve it, about duration, frequency of measures, and so on. And finally, where they said actually they were very pleasantly surprised, we have asked their advice on data analysis as well. So please take a look at this very exciting project. To my point about patient and care partner burden. So I wanted to touch upon this and to mention that what I learned here. There is a big gap between what our patients think is burden and what we researchers or study teams think. And to basically continue on Francesca's point as well. We researchers are very, very concerned about and actually making ourselves crazy about how burdensome some app on the smartphone is going to be, or how complicated it would be for patients to use or install it on their phones. Are they using their phones? Can they use technology due to their disease burden? Even things like, if they will remember charging their wearable devices and so on. And not only that, but we are also kind of afraid that we are going to annoy them if we send them reminders to do this, for example. So I was once asked by a study team if we can put a remote technology in their study that can very precisely measure an aspect of disease, but with no burden to patients. They must do nothing. They can't have any questions asked to them. So I said to the team that this looks to me like they're asking me to do magic. And I just wanted to tell you about two patient advisory board members and what they said and how this opened my eyes to this gap. So one patient said, and I'm paraphrasing here a little bit, how difficult it is really to get this diagnosis, knowing there is no cure and knowing what is going to happen down the road. And then he said, don't worry too much about this or that app. My son is going to help me install some app and set up the Wi-Fi connection and so on. So, knowing what this disease will do to this patient and his son down the road, this just put all of this patient burden, these burden questions in perspective for me. Second, also a really brilliant member of the Patient Advisory Board, she was saying, again paraphrasing, she's using Google Maps to get around, of course, she said, and the voice from the Google, she said, her best friend, she calls her best friend. And she can't start her day without asking Alexa, for the latest news. And of course, her iPhone reminds her, to charge it and so on. So hearing all of this has really changed my whole perspective about concerns I hear from study teams and from researchers. And also, they were my own. This also goes into the stigma of being elderly. We heard about this, so I just want to repeat that, or of having Alzheimer's disease. We need to talk to our patients and not only medical study leads, but also the whole study teams, the operational side, and also data analysts, data scientists like me. We need to make sure, everyone knows that behind that point on the graph is an individual person with preferences, with different behaviors, with different lifestyle. Also, as Michael mentioned. And of course, I do realize not all patients will have family, will have access to Wi-Fi and so on, but still really something to think about when designing our studies and searching for better endpoints. And I just want to add shortly that we are listening. We are working together with patients, of course, about development of drugs, but also about development of new endpoints and new study design. Thank you. And I think over to Sonia.
Well, I just want to say thank you very much, everyone, for that very insightful presentation. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And now, actually, I'd like to say thank you, Francesca, Shelby, Michael, Yelena, for that insightful presentation, and for Jen for moderating. And now I just want to remind the audience, you can continue to send in your questions by using the questions window that's located on the right-hand side of your screen. And we'll try to attend to your questions during the time that we have together. And with that, I'll invite our panelists to put on their webcams. And I did receive a bunch of questions while you were speaking, so Jen, I sent them to you. So I'll leave it to you, Jen, to moderate the Q&A, and then I'll come back for the closing. So then again, so everyone just put on your webcams. All right, there you go.
Thank you so much, Sonia. I'd just like to kick off the questions. We don't have much time with this. So Michael, you brought up the challenges of being a participant in a clinical trial with endpoints that don't really resonate with you and don't really holistically capture what your aspects of your life. And you brought up the question that bugs your wife: have you been able to dress yourself at least twice in the last 3 months? I think everybody on this panel shares that frustration, and we want to move the needle. One area that I'm interested to hear your feedback on, and others, is giving study data back to participants. So in your experience in participating in clinical trials, Michael, do you feel like there are opportunities for either these novel digital measures that are being developed by those on the call to provide insight and important information back to you as a participant in a trial? And kind of interested in your thoughts here.
Yeah, that's really a good point. As a person who's giving up my life to medicine, and you do want to get some feedback. You don't want to just be there and not understand what's going on. And I understand that a lot of the information that they could share with you may cause some changes in your behavior. So it's probably not a good thing to share it with you up front while you're doing the study. But I would say at the end of the study, I would like to hear where I was in relationship to the other people who were in there. They don't have to give you their names, but just say, hey, this is where you were at on your data points, and this is where the rest of the group was. To me, that would be very meaningful. But again, we also have to be very careful when it comes to sharing data, because data could be good and data could be bad. I mean, if somebody's still in the job world and they're into a trial, that data could be detrimental to them possibly even losing their job. So we have to be very careful how we share that data. And I'm a person who really believes in encryption. And if you're going to give data to people, make sure somehow it is encrypted, and only the person who should have it has access to that encryption. Because like I said, if it gets in the wrong hands, it could create a real problem.
Thank you. Yellen, I'm wondering if you can comment on, from the pharma perspective, being able to provide this type of information and whether digital endpoints can, fill this gap here.
Yes, yes, thank you. And this is indeed, as Michael said, exactly that is the problem. And this is the problem we faced immediately when starting implementing applications on smartphones, right? It is so easy and it is so nice to give feedback on what the number of steps, right? But indeed, there is a lot of discussions going on around sharing that data and influencing, as Michael said, the page, right? And I think this is going to come. My personal opinion, this is going to come and this is going to happen. We just need some time. We need time to, collect that data, that rigorous, scientific data that we know, normative data that we know what's going on in reality, right? And at some point, I think this is not going to be a problem anymore, but we are not there yet.
Maybe I can just chip in. I mean, I think the feedback, because this is something that we've kind of, been going back and forth. A lot of people have been going back and forth about. And one of the objections that we hear tends to be an ethical one. And I think it's one where it's worth having a debate about the ethics of this. Is giving somebody data that is essentially bad news. It's showing that they're deteriorating. And people are worried about upsetting patients by giving them data that doesn't look good. I mean, the counter argument is that this is about them, it's generated by them, and it belongs in some way to them. So, I think it is in lots of different ways a really difficult question. I think it's something else where patients' voice, I think, in terms of what is the preference of the patient in terms of return of data, I think needs to be given a lot more weight.
Yeah, I'm wondering, Michael, have you ever been involved in conversations like this? We'll just wrap it up really. I know I see Sonia on the line, so we've got maybe just a moment. But Michael, do you have a message out to the audience of, dealing with this issue that Francesca's raised of, maybe the data is not great news, and what should we be thinking about moving forward?
Well, I got to say, I don't think there's anything wrong with giving people the information of what's going on with them at that time. Yes, I agree. It might not be the best information, but at the same time, when you already feel that you're kind of going downhill and that you might be worse, it's kind of nice to have something to say, well, yes, you are going downhill. So it's not just something playing in your mind that's happening. There's real data to back that up of why this is happening to you. So in a way, it reaffirms what is going on with you. So I think it's good to get the feedback. I get it. There are some people that don't want to know, and those people, that should be one of the questions. Do you want that data? Do you want us to let you know what that data is? Some people may choose not to, but I would think most people who are in clinical trials, they're there for a reason, to help others and hopefully to get some information for themselves at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all this feedback and conversation. I wish we had more time today. Sonia, I'll pass it over to you to close us out.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for those questions. We have reached the end of the Q&A portion of the webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, there's a number of them out there, the team at VivoSense will follow up with you after this presentation. If you have any further questions, please direct them to the email addresses that you see on your screen. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from XTalks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now give me a few seconds. I'm going to send you a link in your chat box and you'll be able to view the recording of that event with this link, and also share this link with your colleagues once they register for the recording as well. And if you're interested in learning more about the topics discussed today, members of the VivoSense team have several upcoming presentations on patient-centric digital endpoint development in rare disease and neurodegenerative disease. So please go ahead and check them out, and I'll send those links also in the chat box. Now, please join us again in thanking our speakers, Shelby, Michael, especially Francesca and Yelena, for that very insightful presentation, and Jen for moderating the Q&A and the webinar. So thank you very much, everyone. And there they are. Okay, we hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X Talks, we thank you for joining us. I'm Sonia Hunt. Until next time, please take care and bye for now. Bye, everyone. Thank you, everyone.